All right. We are here to talk about the American Revolution. So this is going to build upon our last class where we really try to set the stage for this and discuss how those unique American experiences to the colonists as they were settling here in America, those conflicts with the Native Americans, introduction to the ambush style warfare, how all that bleeds over into the style of warfare. Remember, this class is more about American military history than it is American history. Just remember as you watch this, that's where that emphasis is going to be. I'm going to assign some of the readings for this class are going to maybe dive a little deeper into the American history, not the military history side of it. So we're going to focus on the military on this. So just a reminder for you of what exactly we're looking at here. So this is going to be somewhat of a general overview. We're going to just kind of look at where we left off last week. We're going to look at the beginnings, the Northern Campaign, the Southern Campaign. We're going to take a brief look at some of the most notable leaders. Again, you're going to have some video and some readings that are going to take you a little deeper on some of them. So as I begin this, just kind of think to yourself, maybe jot down on some notes if you have a notepad in front of you, who some of those notable leaders that you might already know about. Even if you haven't studied American history much or particularly military history, there are some notable leaders that should come to mind, and we'll see if mine match yours at the end of this. So, all right, quick review. We have our perception of the American militiaman at this point in time. Over here we have the British soldier and a French soldier. So here's kind of what we're looking at. You got to remember that this American militiaman, this image that we tend to glorify and think of, probably had a lot more in common with this British and French soldier than anything, because those origins were key to those early soldiers. They were blended though with those unique American experiences, and in many ways those unique experiences are kind of what helped the American Army win the Revolutionary War. Particularly some of the terrain that the colonists were exposed to, were used to fighting in, that the British troops simply were not. All right, so the military revolution, that's going to be one of your readings you're going to focus on. You probably already focused on it a little bit from the last class, but think about it again and how it leads into those larger armies, advances in tactics, new just military strategies in general that the leaders are going to be thinking of throughout this time period. All right, you watched the links already, and you should understand the general difference between that tercio formation to the line formation. Again, that progression from the old square pike focused sword, blade, edge weapon centric formation to a line formation that comes with the advent of gunpowder and its heavy utilization on the battlefield. So keep those in mind. Again, this is just a review for you, but a hand cannon progresses all the way into a flintlock musket, and the pike progresses over to a socket bayonet. Okay, so we see the pike here progresses itself. We see the pike here progresses itself all the way over to a socket bayonet from a plug bayonet. So, tertial formation, we had our pikemen. They were the primary method of assault. That goes to a musket that's capable of firing one round, and then a plug bayonet goes in the end of it. That progresses to a socket bayonet where a rifle could be shot through, possibly even reloaded with a bayonet on the end of it with care. We also see some cannons start to progress a little bit. And not heavy focus of this class, but we will talk about a gentleman later who was very centric to the use of artillery, and the week 3, as we talk about the War of 1812, we'll take a little bit deeper look at that man. Again, operational differences. I'm going to move myself back over as we see the differences on the left. We see the we see European cities and towns, heavy occupied heavily populated areas, and now we see the American wilderness over here. These pictures depict battles in European cleared open land as opposed to the heavily forested lands of North America that the revolution was fought in. All right, early stages of the revolution. So something that's critical to remember is the fact that prior to the Declaration of Independence, everyone here was British. We were all British citizens here. Colonists in the Americas were upset. They were wanting reprieve from Britain. They were upset over a number of things. One of those was taxation without representation. They had a number of uprisings and skirmishes that ultimately led to battles, larger battles, and the Declaration of Independence, and ultimately war was an all-out war was fought. It was the true beginnings of our dual military. As we see the American Revolution start to take shape, we see that regular army that was built and began to be outfitted and formulated, supplemented by reserve forces or militiamen at that time. Today we know that as the Army and the National Guard, and most every branch of the military has some type of reserve component to supplement it as well. All right, the Minuteman. I'll drop a link to this in today's class notes, and you can watch that. But ready on a moment's notice, a minute's notice. They were selected from local militias. They were the better trained, the elite, if you will, of that day. And they primarily shot smoothbore muskets. That being because the smoothbore musket, if you remember from last week's video, last week's talk, was easier and quicker to reload, could be fired more rapidly than a rifle, as compared specifically to the Kentucky long rifle. It's easier to load without that extra friction in the barrel that makes the ball come out of a rifle more accurately. Musket's just faster. So they were already veterans of conflicts. Most of these men had fought with the Native Americans on the frontier, the western frontier at that time, and possibly even the French and Indian War. So they were believed to be able to have shot and load 4 times in a minute. And if you have any experience at all with a muzzleloader, that is amazing. It's an amazing feat. Very, very admirable that they could do that. The Boston Tea Party, we have mostly heard of that. So the Americans felt that Britain, through the East India Trading Company, had a monopoly on tea. The Americans were refusing to pay the heavy tariffs. They were refusing to submit themselves to this monopoly they felt on tea. So they went out and basically pillaged the ship, threw its contents over into the Boston Harbor instead of purchasing the tea. So they left it sit there, refused to purchase it, then went and threw it overboard. That infuriated the British government. That was a pretty distinct sign of rebellion, and really was a huge flash in the powder keg that was brewing here anyway. That takes us on up into 1775. So several other conflicts and concerns had been brewing in the meantime, and ultimately what we wind up here is we are looking at a store of American munitions over here. So the militiamen, the early militia, the citizens that were just forming up and really preparing themselves for the fight that I believe everyone probably knew was coming at this point in time, were beginning to store gunpowder, ball ammunition, lead, supplies that they would need for these battles up here. So on late in the evening on the 18th of April, around 10 o'clock in the evening, we have an expedition that leaves Boston. So we have 2 different expeditions that leave, and they're going to march over here, and they are going to over here at Concord, and they are going to destroy this storehouse, these warehouses of munitions. As they are marching, and this is called the shot heard around the world, those British forces encounter some American militiamen, about 70 to 77, and they come to a confrontation here around 3 o'clock in the afternoon, meet up with this group of militiamen right here. There's basically a standoff that happens on Lexington Green. At some point during that standoff, there is a shot that gets fired, and that shot is called the shot that's heard around the world. So nobody knows who fired that first shot. It is believed it might have been a random shot fired on one of the sides. What is known though is that the British forces respond to that shot, even if it came from their side. They respond in force and fire volley fire into the American militiamen, who subsequently return volley fire. A skirmish ensues and it's quickly dispersed. Ahead of these British troops had been riders that were alarming the militiamen, the residents, to the British forces that were coming, and they had ridden on ahead. So what had happened was the Americans were able to move most of the munitions they had stored up. So the British, once they actually did reach their objective, the storehouse, they weren't able to recover much, but they did burn it. So American troops who had dispersed at that point in time, or militiamen rather, not troops, had seen the fire, and they thought that the town had been fired, not just the warehouse, the storehouse of munitions. So as the British troops are returning, they use ambush-style tactics and basically harass them on the majority of their return march. And they're very, very effective in that harassment and those ambushes on the return march. And that's really the ignition, the spark of the American Revolution. It's called the shot heard around the world because that at the time Britain was the world's superpower, and it had just been challenged to war, is essentially what happened here. Some pictures there popped up at the bottom. I was covering one of them. So let's talk a little bit about the Battle of Bunker Hill. And this is, we're looking still on up into June of 1775. What's pretty significant about this is the majority of the fighting was not at Bunker Hill. They thought it was, but due to some confusion and some improper map reading at the time, it was actually, most of it was fought at Breed's Hill. And I'll try to link to some reading or videos about this in your class notes, because it warrants a little more time than we're able to spend on it right here in this talk. But it was a pretty significant battle. American militiamen fought off the advancement of British troops on Breed's Hill as long as they could. Then they actually fell back to Bunker Hill, and they thought they were on Bunker Hill to begin with. They actually weren't. So that's a pretty significant battle worth looking at. We've already been introduced to that. So in 1775, General George Washington is chosen to lead this American army. So these words at the bottom are cut off a little bit by my picture, but basically it's build the plane while you fly it. The term is build the airplane in flight. So essentially you take off and you're still doing work to the plane, trying to get it going. You're trying to figure things out as you go is really what that term means. And the Army was born on June 14th when it was actually formed by Congress. So the Continental Army was formed. George Washington was chosen to lead it the next day, and now we have the fledgling beginnings of an actual military, not just the militiamen who'd been skirmishing with the British prior to this. Now we have a formalized army. Not much of a formalized army at that point. It was still in growth, but it was there. It was there. Its beginnings were rooted in English heritage. You got to remember, George Washington himself had been an officer in the British Army, so that's where the majority of that experience had came from. So he was pretty novice as an officer. He didn't have a ton of military experience. He had no manual. Now I've got, even over top of my desk, I've got a ton of different military manuals that I refer to for various things. And you can buy most of them. There are many booksellers today that have them. But at that point in time, those manuals hadn't been written. He had nowhere to look for the right answer, so to speak. He was holding to the concept he needed a regular army based on British standards. We tend to look at what's already existing and try to model that, and that's what he was doing with the army. He quickly learned, and they grew, and they did develop their own unique fighting style, but really that unique style was born here. The simple fact that a United States Army existed at that point in time meant that we were in open rebellion against Britain. This was no longer groups of rebels skirmishing against the British forces, which could easily be written off probably as rebels, as people who were not loyal to the crown that were uprising. The fact that there was a formalized U.S. government with an army meant that we were in open rebellion. There was no turning back. We were at war now. He ultimately won through tenacity. Our fighting men, and they just simply did not quit. And he continuously learned from his mistakes, which is critical to any leader. All right, so just a quick look at the combatants as we go through this. So the Americans, and led by General Washington, the cause was liberty or survival. They understood the terrain. It was pretty dense. Remember those heavily wooded areas that we were used to fighting in. We had no navy. We really didn't have any allies yet. No reliable army. The colonies were not unified across one front. So 13 different colonies, 13 different efforts. No real central recruiting supply. And there was a bit of a fear of a standing army at that time. Britain did have a good standing army already. They were using mercenaries to help fight, but they had a centrally controlled existing army. They had the dominant navy in the world at that time. They could move their army anywhere on the coast that they needed. They also had many loyalists left inside the United States colonies or the American colonies, and not everyone here was a rebel. They had many people feeding them information, helping them out, aiding them here. So they had a lot of advantages. Some disadvantages they did have, though, was those colonial assets were now in rebellion. So they had relied heavily upon those American colonists being their subjects, their citizens, and they weren't really that in tune with those at that time. So whenever the American colonies rebelled, they had to draw upon assets from Britain proper that did not understand those colonists and those colonies as well. They lost much of their fighting force, defected to rebel in the Revolution. In the Atlantic Ocean, huge dividing area. We'll talk a little bit about in the war, the next class, the War of 1812, how one of those one battle was even fought after that war ended because the time and the distance it took for information to travel across the ocean. So we'll just look. This just kind of shows the population density, and you kind of see, and this is critical. Remember this slide as we look next week as well. The heavy population was up against the coast right here. This was very much the frontier, and I live in Kentucky. You can see that this is Kentucky County of Virginia. I live about over here somewhere, and you can kind of see how that was all starting to formulate at that time. If you look at that map and think of today's map in your mind, you can kind of see the similarities there. So July 4th, 1776, the independence was declared. We formalized our grievances with Britain, and it was signed by our delegates. So we see our first flag there, May of 1776, by Miss Betsy Ross. She made that and designed that first flag. It's grown and progressed significantly since then. Look at just some of the weapons of the Revolutionary War. This is a picture of that smoothbore musket that very much the British Brown Bess musket equipped both sides, was the predominant rifle. Some were armed with sidearms. These are going to be flintlock pistols. And this is the Kentucky long rifle. I will note on this as we look at the sword over here, mostly carried by officers at that time. Note that the forestock on the forearm stock rather on the Kentucky rifle comes all the way to the end, which does not allow for a bayonet to be mounted. The Brown Bess is going to stop back here, and that's where that's going to allow that bayonet to be mounted. that's a tradition carried on even to our modern military rifles. We'll have a bayonet lug and the ability to mount a bayonet there. I'll drop this link. This is just another video about the Kentucky Long Rifle. I'll drop it in the class notes for the week. Henry Knox, we'll talk about him a little bit more and in the next class, but he was a critical member. He was what's important, he was a first staff officer, so General Washington brought him in, and you're going to hear me really start to talk about combined arms warfare and how all the different branches, cavalry, infantry, armor, all that work together to fight a battle. He was really the first staff officer and the first to introduce that concept, and General Washington would use him to help him place artillery for battles. So he would rely on him. When I say staff officer, I mean that staff of officers that the leader is relying upon to help lead and guide and give advice to. So I am in that picture, a much younger version of me. That's me sitting on that cannon many years ago. Very fond of the artillery. Some British options as 1776 comes about. They could use their massive navy. They could land on the southern coast and come in. They could make a northern assault. It's a heavily populated area here. Although there are some loyalists, this would be hard fighting for them. They can make an overland march south from Canada and combine that with a naval landing here to try to secure this northern area for themselves, or they could do some combination of all. France now becomes involved, and we have a world war. France comes to the aid of America, and everyone's involved now. So as this fighting up here intensifies with some assistance from France and a little bit of naval support, the Britain's going to look at the south as being the new objective. Again, they're looking for some type of land mass that they can control to move from. As they look at the south, a man named Francis Marion becomes very prominent. He aided General Greene's southern campaign, and his mantra was very fast strikes. He would move in through dense terrain that he and his men knew well. The British troops were bogged down, marred, trying to move their heavy equipment through the marshes, through the swamps, and the limited roadway. Lightning fast raids. He would move in, strike, and then move out. And really helped General Greene slow and stop and really bring that southern attack to a grind and really make it ineffective for the British. While this was going on, General Washington went into Valley Forge for the winter of 1777 to 78. He'd suffered a very devastating loss at Brandywine in Philadelphia. Moved to Valley Forge to basically recoup and regather and ride the winter out. The high ground of Valley Forge was defensible, and it was the first permanent encampment of the U.S. Army. They brought in a man named Baron Friedrich von Steuben. He was a Prussian drill master, and he helped take that group of rough militiamen and help turn them around and help train, instill some discipline, some drill. All of our branches of the military still practice some form of drill and ceremony today, and that helps instill discipline. He helped bring that to those fighting men there, and they came out of Valley Forge a much more disciplined fighting force. He's considered the father of the non-commissioned officer corps, which we'll talk maybe a little bit more about in some of the later classes, but that's where you have subordinate leaders, many leaders scattered throughout the ranks. So instead of just one officer trying to give all the commands, they now have subordinate officers helping them and helping echo their commands and lead those smaller groups. He helped adjust that European style of fighting to the American fighting style and help blend the two and give us our unique. That's where that unique American way of war is going to be birthed. Benedict Arnold is a man worth looking at. He was a famous trader. He had felt ignored for some of his previous heroics. He felt he had some accomplishments that weren't properly acknowledged, and he allowed the British free passage down the Hudson River to attack in New York. So Ultimately, though, we win the war. The siege of Yorktown in 1781 helps us win the war. British troops surrender, and General Washington is considered the hero and victorious. And now the real work begins. We'll pick up the next class and we'll start talking about some of the challenges that almost immediately face the military. We've won our independence. The British are going to leave, at least for now. More problems are coming. But as for now, we've won. We are a country. We've won our freedom. So thank you very much for taking the time to watch this and follow up on the readings. There's be some discussion questions I'll have you answer. Any questions, comments, concerns, feel free to reach out. Thank you.